Oh, hey, folks. I'm Arthur Madison. I'm just your friendly neighborhood union president living in the year 2022. Things aren't looking so great for us unions here, but we'll get to that later. You're probably wondering how a normal guy like myself ended up at the top of the union food chain. Well, that's what this story's all about. And we'll probably learn a little about unions along the way. You see, this all takes us back to the year 1866, where I'm a hard-working government contracted construction worker living in Chicago. I love my job, but I'm forced to work 10 or even 12 hours a day, and it's really starting to take a toll on me. The other day, I started to hear rumors of people joining the National Labor Union. The NLU is currently campaigning for 8-hour workdays, so I decided to join up. The NLU is fighting hard to get Congress to pass a statute providing 8-hour workdays to government workers. In 1868, they end up getting what we want. I'm so happy, but in response to the cut hours, my boss just decides to cut my wages too. So things are not so great anymore. President Ulysses S. Grant eventually orders that federal agencies must not reduce wages, but companies continue finding loopholes to get around this statute. And I start hearing about this other union called the Knights of Labor that everybody's talking about. So eventually I end up deciding to leave the NLU to join these other guys. Things were okay for a while, but this is where the story really takes a turn for the worse. In May of 1886, we decide to end up going out for a peaceful march for 8-hour workdays. There are 35,000 of us out there when all of a sudden the police attack and they kill some picketers at the McCormick Reaper plant. This outbreak prompts a protest meeting planned for Haymarket Square. So, I'm really all about this whole 8-hour workday thing, and I'm upset with the police for attacking the peaceful protesters. So, I agree, why not go along? Towards the end of the meeting, us gathered protesters are once again attacked by the police armed with rifles. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, some guy who no one really knows who he is throws a bomb into the crowd and causes this huge panic and gunfire from police. Turns out I got shot to death. You're probably wondering what happens next, because obviously I'm not dead anymore. All of a sudden, I'm shaken back to life by this wizard named Samuel Gompers, and he says, "My name is Samuel Gompers, and I am a wizard. I'm going to bring you back to life and make you immortal because I need your help. You see, I am the president of the American Federation of Labor, which is the largest union ever. And I'm giving you a mission to stand up for the common man and make sure that the unions always do too." So, that whole thing happened, and it was pretty crazy, to be honest with you, but I end up moving out to New York City, where I meet this lady, and she becomes Mrs. Arthur Madison. Things are finally just going really well until March 25th, 1911. I say goodbye to my wife, and I head out to work for one last time, My wife, she works at this Triangle Shirtwaist Factory on the 9th floor. And on this day, her boss decided to lock the stairwell doors and exits so that they couldn't take unauthorized breaks. A fire breaks out, and she ends up getting killed. She's one of 143 employees that get locked in and they're unable to escape. I'm feeling down in the dumps about the whole thing, and I write a letter to my local congressman demanding improved factory safety standards. But I just can't take the sight of that burned building from my window, so I move out west for a change of scenery to work on the railroad. So I take this job as a conductor, which I really like, but I'm still being forced to work 10 or 12 hours a day. Me and my coworkers, we get together and we organize a strike with the other railroad companies as well. Till all of a sudden, this House representative guy named William Anderson hears about this strike and urges us not to because he says this is going to hurt the whole country. So he agrees that in return, he's going to draft the Adamson Act, which establishes an 8-hour workday with additional pay for overtime for interstate railroad workers. So me and my coworkers agree to the whole thing and end up avoiding this nationwide strike. President Woodrow Wilson goes ahead and signs this into law in 1916. So fast forward ahead to 1924. The whole country just got out of this big war where unions are gaining all this strength, but the end of the war brings about a lot of labor turmoil. Starting to think of ways where we can improve this bargaining process because it doesn't seem that the railroad workers have much say in what goes on around the whole place. So In January 1925, I figure out a way to get myself at this informal meeting between railway labor executives and labor union leaders. Not very much comes out of this whole meeting, but an official conference is finally held in the summer of 1925 where the Railway Labor Act is drafted and passed by Congress. In 1926, the Railway Labor Act brings a much more effective system for settling disputes about pay, rules, working conditions, and it guarantees the right of workers to organize and join unions and elect representatives without interference or threats from their employer. So I'm feeling pretty good about this whole mission that Samuel Gompers sent me on, so I decide it's time to move back into the city. Although things took a turn for the worst, this whole depression hits and tears apart the economy, and things are really just starting to fall apart everywhere, but it turns out this is the union's big chance to shine. Workers everywhere are displaced and they need someone with the power to negotiate for them. I get a job in a factory, and luckily I keep my job despite all the bad stuff going on. But things aren't perfect. Me and my coworkers were kind of struggling a little bit, and we're not allowed to unionize because of these yellow dog contracts. Yellow dog contracts are this agreement between employers and employees where the employee agrees not to join a union or else they're going to be fired. But luckily, in 1932, the Norris-LaGuardia Act is passed, and it bans yellow dog contracts. The Congress of Industrial Organizations then forms in 1935, and they're credited for organizing the unorganized by providing representation to unskilled and semi-skilled laborers. This sparks this huge explosion in union membership, and so I decide to join the Congress of Industrial Organizations. There's still some tension when the word union is mentioned around employers, and actually negotiating between an employer and a union is really difficult. So I call up my friend, Senator Robert Wagner. I suggest, hey Wagner, why don't you create a bill that provides guidelines on how to negotiate wages and define basic rights for private sector employees? So I help him do just that, and together we come up with this whole National Labor Relations Act, or sometimes called the Wagner Act, of 1935. This act allows collective bargaining where you can negotiate wages and other conditions of employment. It establishes secret ballot elections to allow employees to choose a union to represent them, and it allows for collective action like a strike if necessary. Now, after this act passed, I feel like I'm pretty much done all I can here in New York, so I decide to move out to Detroit to start working in automobile factories. I maintain my membership in the CIO, and they start striking everywhere because they want closed shops where you're required to join a union in order to work for employers, and employers are required to hire people from the union. So the CIO loves these closed shops things, and they decide that they're going to start out this new sit-down strike tactic where they simply sit down on the job and protest. So we're doing this whole sit-down, and they just keep getting shut down over and over again out in Michigan. But in other places, the strikes become really violent, and in Chicago, 10 people end up getting killed. So all of a sudden, the government realizes that it's got to get control of these union guys because they are getting a little out of hand. And so they set up the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. This law establishes a minimum wage and time and a half overtime pay. It also does a lot of other things like bans child labor. So, I'm pretty happy about this guaranteed minimum wage thing, but I am starting to question the whole fairness of this closed union shop. This brings us to the year 1939 and the eruption of World War II. In 1940, I'm required to register for the draft and I get deployed to Europe. And I'm fighting overseas until the end of the war in 1945. Then I end up coming back from the war and I settle down in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania and take a job in a steel mill. Me and my co-workers join the United Steelworkers of America. So in 1946, we go ahead and take action and organize a peaceful strike, and we're joined by 40 million other steelworkers from 30 states. The peaceful protests and pressure from President Truman on steel companies, they go ahead and give the steelworkers an 18 cents an hour wage increase. But then as the 40s come to an end, me and my friends in the USWA find ourselves struggling amidst the Red Scare. Sympathy towards communism brings intense scrutiny around, and by 1958, we're back in an economic recession. Me and my pals, we're starting to feel pretty frustrated, so in the summer of 1959, we go ahead and decide that for 116 days, we're just going to bring production to a halt and go ahead and strike. And then after that, the Supreme Court goes ahead and decides that they're going to enforce part of the Taft-Hartley Act, which requires me and my pals at the steelworking mill to go back to work for the 80-day cooling off period. This whole strike thing gave us a small wage increase as well as some benefits increases and cost of living provisions as well. And then shortly after that, President Eisenhower goes ahead and signs the Landrum-Griffin Act into law, which protects the interests of union members like us by giving us a Bill of Rights and also establishes some financial reporting requirements. In the late 70s, the U.S. economy goes through another big shift. We go from being a major exporter to a major importer. Cheap products are just flowing in from Europe and Asia, making it harder for American businesses to maintain high production. Many companies are forced to shut down factories, putting many workers, including myself, out of work. Union membership has fallen dramatically, and I'm fortunate enough to find a job in a non-unionized business that has just been founded. It's called Apple Computer Company. This whole tech industry thing is great. We've got great jobs. In the early 2000s, I got chosen to be the leader of a new union because, folks, the unions are still dying. But it does seem like there's going to be a new major economic depression which might cause unions to rise in power once again. And then on November 1st, 2018, 20,000 Google workers walked out in protest of the handling of sexual harassment cases. It turns out that just because tech jobs are so great and the employees get paid so highly doesn't mean that they can't demand changes be made too. I've been studying this case really hard, and I'm working hard to bring a new era of organized labor to one of the most progressive industries to ever exist. If I can really hit this nail on the head, it's going to change some of the most popular businesses in the world in crazy ways.